Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this July 19th, Thursday, 2018 day on our calendar. Greg Anthony here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. And today I want to just start out with this premise that the Vatican Jesuits are a major player in what we call the New World Order. And to sell that point, or to at least get it on the table in mainstream or in alternative media discussions, is not easy. And I want to start out today, if you've been following the political theater in America lately with the Trump phenomena, as well as now the Democrats really calling themselves Democrat socialists or vis-a-vis communism, we have to look at the Vatican creation called communism. And when I say that, people roll their eyes and they say, oh, how is that? No, it's Karl Marx. It's Russia. But you have to go back farther than that. And we've talked about that on our show, looking at the country of Paraguay in the 1600s. Because right there, if you look at what they did, the Vatican Jesuits created what we know as communism today, starting with their reductions in Paraguay. Now, in order for the Roman Church to achieve international dictatorship, okay, when I say that, I mean that the Roman Empire really has never died out. It just took another name, and that is the Vatican. And the same goals are there, world domination. And for the nations, for this to occur, the nations had to be rebuilt and aligned into blocks, pitted against each other, especially after World War II. Now, this would be called what we know as the Cold War, and the rebuilding of Europe and Japan. Now, how did that occur? First, we had to destroy Europe in the war, destroy Japan, in order to rebuild it. And it would be financed, wouldn't it be, isn't it interested, by the Vatican Wall Street bankers who were supposedly behind the destruction to begin with, and also their loyal Jesuit Freemasons in the Federal Reserve Bank. Now, their obedient government since the 14th Amendment in USA called this what? Nothing more but foreign aid. What does that do? Justifies more taxation in the countries, especially in America, further destroying the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant middle class, which is what you see today. Now, the Catholic and Protestant nations of Western Europe, they're united into what we call NATO, right? The North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, against that common enemy, which is the Soviet Union or Stalin's USSR. Okay, and also the satellite nations back then called the Warsaw Pact. Now, isn't it interesting when you do history of Joseph Stalin that he basically, you should call him Jesuit Father Joseph Stalin if you do some history, because that's where he was educated. That's where he took asylum many times before he took over power in Russia. That's when Father Edmund Walsh from the United States at Georgetown University went over to broker a deal with Lenin and the Bolshevik Revolution when it needed money, and brought his piggy bank of Western money over with one caveat, and that was that Joseph Stalin was to get a major role in the Bolshevik Revolution, which led eventually to Lenin's demise and Stalin's now dictatorship in Russia, which killed 30 to 40 and that 1 million people there. And it dwarfs what Hitler did. And all this was done with the help of, guess who? Vatican Jesuits. And all you have to do is some history and look at it and put this story just right on the table with the others. Now, the only way they can get away with what they do even to this day is by not having it on the table, not having people really even talk about it. But you see what they did by controlling both capitalism and socialism and communist through the Vatican central banks and of course communism, the Vatican Roman Catholic Church has been able to keep the world, in a sense, divided against itself, while they attempt to build what will be a one-world communist government, a government where you'll have no rights whatsoever. Now here's the deal. If you follow the theater of American politics today, isn't there this really, all the Democrats and Republicans, all they're talking about is this Russia collusion with the Trump presidency, this insane look at what's going on in our politics that has no validity in fact. In fact, it's a ruse to keep people from really looking at the important things going on worldwide. I mean, people always ask me, why are there so many wars? Why does it never end? Because the world is purposely divided into these blocks, fighting one another. Just like you can see in America now in politics, I've never seen it at a worse stage. You have the left and the right fighting hand and fist against each other over nonsense. Now, let's go back a little bit. When you look at communism, think about the Soviet Union, China, North Korea, Cuba, Paraguay. This is all a Vatican creation, as well as Laos and the Vietnam situation. They still now actively pit everyone against each other after World War II. And if you look at the case of Laos, it was certain that this country could not be developed until there was an agreement among them on what to do with it. And they knew pretty well since the 19th century that Laos had fresh waters, mountains, warm weather, and it was a dangerous place against population reduction if developed, but also a perfect place for the New World Order next plan. And that's what we look at when we see what happened in the Vietnam War. Now, we could go farther and look at, I always did a lot of stories about the Vietnam War because I grew up at the time when I could have been there. And there was, I look at it from a point of view of a young man who had no idea about what I talk about today, who looked at the world through the eyes of what the Jesuits in Vatican wanted me to see, and that was because, one, I was right there in the forefront being a Catholic school student. I mean, I went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, and then as I was leaving high school, the Vietnam War was at its peak, and we were given a very quick education about what it was. Now, I found it quite interesting that even back then there were the anti-war people and the people that were gung-ho about fighting in Vietnam. And what we were sold was basically a bill of goods. On one hand, we were told that we were fighting against communism. We had to stop communism in Vietnam because it was spreading. And just as I talked about earlier, how this has been orchestrated, you had the young men at that time, the young people in America, divided the same way. One told that this war was a farce. The other saying, no, if you said that, you weren't patriotic. And the outcome was very interesting. And no, America fought there, never could win the war, never wanted to win, and all it was a bloodbath. And the people that suffered the most, outside of the hundreds of thousands of American young men that were either killed or injured there, many still. I mean, I had a friend who never recovered from Vietnam, and I told that story many times. He died quite young from Agent Orange, and I remember him quite well as a good buddy in high school. Now, what happens though is if you look at that, if you look at what went on at the Vietnam War. They're doing the exact same thing now with America, but in a completely different way. It's this kind of global, anti-globalist two groups fighting against one another. And in the middle, you have middle America suffering the most. So when you look at communism, you have to look at it as a creation, as something that was there to always have a constant enemy. Now, if we fast forward, and I'm just going to do a real quick fast forwarding here because there's a lot more behind what I'm talking about. is once the Reagan brought down, and Reagan was a Vaticanite from the top to the bottom, even though he was a Republican. Doesn't matter, folks, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you're always working with the Pope. You're working with the master, the satanic Luciferian master in Rome. And if you don't play ball with him, you're not going to be there. Now here's what happens. So they get rid of the Cold War by bringing down that wall, right? Remember, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. Well, as soon as they tore down that wall, what did they have to do? There no longer was that Cold War enemy, that communistic enemy. They had to create another one. And what was that? That was worldwide terror and ISIS. So the creation of ISIS replaced bringing down the wall. And if you go back to Vietnam, just one little aside, I was saying who really suffered there outside of the American people that were killed was the Buddhist Wahhabs. They were wiped out. And isn't it interesting that it always seems to be these groups of religions wiped out that aren't behind what the Pope is professing in Catholicism. Just think about this. I'm going to give you a little aside here. In 1776, the population of Latin America was 98% Protestant, 1.8% Catholic, and 0.2% other religions, 1% were Jewish. By 2012, 94% of all Mexicans are Catholic. I'm going to talk a little bit about how that occurred. But let's look generally at this word New World Order and try to get a handle on what it really means. And it's really about controlling the global central banking cartel. By doing that, by controlling central banking around the world, the Jesuit Vaticans and all of their phony Jews that are, masquerading as Jews and really aren't. So it's similar to the American Congress when you have the Knesset in Israel. They're really a Vatican creation. The Vatican controls the Israeli top levels, and that we've discussed many, many times in this show. Now, all of these people and these religions, other religions, are controlled via Freemasonry. And they, the ones that adhere to their Masonic pyramid structure, maintain this massive wealth for their religions, okay? Now, think about it. This is just a little thing I like to watch. Now, if you watch Trump, watch him give, every time he gives an interview or he's talking to a state leader and he's sitting down, they're going to give a shot from the waist up. They'll show him, and you're always going to see his hands in what's called an inverted pyramid. And really, that's a sign to his Freemasonic pyramid structured idealists, or we call them globalists. Just that it's a sign saying, okay, guys, we're all on the same team. I'm on your team, and I know who you are. So, while you get these honest religions now all over the world are always attacked by Rome, right? They're always attacked. In America, I've seen many Christian, true Christian, small religious groups always somehow attacked by our government, by the FBI, by the CIA, etc. Now, the ultimate goal, using now ISIS, the Sunni Muslims against the Shiite Muslims, and then we always have these groups fighting. Their ultimate goal, basically, is one communist, one world government, aka the New World Order. And how they get there is, through a system that they have created. Now, let's look at it just generally, okay? Look at it just generally. And the Jesuits, okay, just think of it this way. I wanted to get to this one thought. Now, if you look at Japan, it's the basically Jesuit Asia technology outlet. While America, I'm just trying to generalize here, is the military outlet, and the city the city of London is their financial outlet. Of Rome, of course, is their spiritual outlet, the center of all of this. And via treaties, they have China as their cheap factory outlet, right? And the world is nothing more, is the Jesuit and secret society's New World Order world, whether you like it or not. And when you start looking at it this way, everything that you view changes. You know, at least in this part of the world, also in America now, we have this big conflict between our friends on the southern border with this idea of, you can't get a day in the news without the idea of people fighting against open immigration, against those who are fighting against closed borders. And it involves Central America. And it's been a hotbed of Vatican control for years. So what I say to people is, if you're looking at Mexico or if you're looking at Central America, let's do just a quick history lesson on what went on. And if we go back to 1519, the Roman Catholic conquistadors from Spain, what did they do? They invaded Central America and a place we now call Mexico. And they slaughtered millions of Inca and Aztec aboriginals that lived there in a huge mass genocide to take over this entire region and its wealth. Now, once the takeover was complete, what did the Spaniards do? They quickly began flying their new Mexican flag here. That's exactly what they did, which is a combination of the Italian flag and the Roman eagle, both showing a loyal homage to who? The Vatican in Rome. Now, during the First Crusades, the Pope's army killed all who would not be baptized into the Roman Church. And today, really, nothing has changed. All pagans were put to death, remember? And forced to speak Spanish. And as I mentioned earlier, let's look at numbers. In 1776, the population of Latin America was 98% Protestant, almost 2% Catholic, and 0.2% of other religions, including Judaism. By 2012, 94% of Mexicans are Catholic. I wonder how that occurred. I think I explained it. Now, let's just flip over, if you think I'm just talking about the takeover of, Central America by the Vatican and the Roman Empire. Let's just shift real quickly to, let's shift to Poland. Let's use that as an example. Now, why was Poland used in World War II? Why did Hitler first invade, Hitler being a creation of the Vatican and by the Pope at the time, Pope Pius XII, who mentored Hitler? The Jesuits actually wrote Mein Kampf, Father Stampfel, if history serves itself well and people do a study into really what happened. And at least put the story on the table. If you're going to say, oh, it can't be true, well, at least let's talk about it because there are facts that lead you to that conclusion. So anyway, let's look at Poland then. Right before Hitler invaded, it was the most eclectic Jewish country in Europe. And in Warsaw, there were over 4 million Jews prospering in that country. And now you know that Jews are not loyal to the Pope in Rome. Just as they tried, to kill off the Protestants in, the Inquisition in the 1500s when the Jesuits were created for that purpose, they did the same thing with the Jews in Poland. And when you look at the population of Jews in Warsaw alone, the population of Jews in Poland was somewhere in the vicinity, of Warsaw alone, was somewhere in the vicinity of 3.5 million. And that was the largest population in a city in all of Europe, and they were quite well off, living a good life. And guess what happened? After World War II, and statistics now show there are mostly Roman Catholics, and maybe 100,000 Jews left. So what do you think they invaded there for? Was it just was that just Hitler's conquest of Europe? No, it was doing the Pope's bidding. And if you look at all the people killed in World War II, It was always, a lot of Protestants went down the tube, so to speak. So, talking in terms of war, you can't rule out the fact that it's not just one country fighting another. It's, as I said at the beginning of the show, by creating blocks of countries that are constantly fighting one another, the people working under the VaticanJesuit New World Order, working with them, can get to where they want to go, and that is complete control. And why do they want complete control of the world? Well, why do they want complete control of America? I mean, just ask yourself that. I mean, you can give 100 different reasons, but really, all I'm trying to do is explain from a point of view of world politics where we really stand today. And I think if you neglect looking at the Vatican control of all of this stuff, you can start looking at the control of the central banks and how they work together there. You always find them. And how about the control of big oil? How about Vatican Jesuits' control of both sides of the American-led war on terror? When was the Masonic Kingdom of Saudi Arabia created? In 1932, using a fanatical Islamic cult known as the Wahhabi Islam, the sword of the church in the Jesuits' modern-day Freemasonic pyramid. And boy, this opens up a story that you could spend a year on, and that is how the Vatican created Islam and for what purpose. And I like looking at the two books, looking at how Catholicism mirrors what's in the Quran and how closely they resemble one another. And now, what are they being used for? To kill off white Protestant America. And this control of both sides of the American-led war on terror is really how they do it. So how many times have we done a show on that? And it's sometimes a little bit depressing that more people don't catch on, but you wouldn't expect it when the propaganda machine is so strong worldwide. And those who do catch on always seem to be isolated, right? The voice is considered, conspiracy theory. The voice of reason sometimes is considered to be not suitable for the public airwaves. Well, what's not suitable for the public airwaves is for this story not to be told, because it's one of the greatest hidden from people ever. And, I want to preface by saying one thing, by I end the first half of this show. Everything I say here has been said before. This is nothing new. And I'm not some guy that came up with all. No. This is stuff that has been talked about for hundreds of years. And there are some really important books that have been hidden from people, that have been written hundreds of years ago, talking about the same exact thing. The only sad thing about this is that as we grow as far as getting the word out, so to speak, with the internet, we can talk to people in China, everybody can communicate so quickly now. You would think that this story would grow and grow and grow, but it doesn't. It seems to be dwindling out, and less people are talking about it. And what does that tell me? That a lot of the information that you're getting is nonsense when it comes to these subjects. And if you want to understand what's going on in the world, this is one that you have to study. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn, the Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this July 19th, 2018 day on our calendar. We're going over a few important issues regarding the New World Order and things that seem to be left out of a lot of the discussions about the major question, what's going on in the world? And I think if we took this story seriously and did some really serious research, including those who have a public forum. I mean, those who can talk to millions. I don't see Hollywood ever mentioning this story at all. Why? Would it be that they're controlled by the Vatican Jesuits? I don't see our major politicians who have a public voice talk about this. Could it be that they're controlled? I don't see our major news media talk about it. Could they be controlled by the same organization? How about many of the top, internet stations, top people on the internet, many are who could be controlled by these very same people? Could it be? Well, you make up your mind on that. But occasionally I like to go back and look at the history of the Jesuits. We've done it a number of times in many different ways, and I ran across a good article that synthesizes it, and I thought I'd go over it again. And you can check it out. Go anywhere on the web and go, give me the history of the Jesuits, and you can start reading about it, and then work your way through some of the stories that we've done over, on this show over a decade to get things out. Now, look, do I do this to want to change the world? No, of course not. There's no way you're going to change the world. I wouldn't want to change it. And the reason I say that is I don't like trying to do things that are out of my control. But what is in my control is the ability to look at these stories, to at least talk about them and get them out, even though so what I'm saying is that even though you can't change the world because it's out of your control, you can do things that are in your control. And one is I could use the information that I've learned over the years since living in Italy and in Rome in the 80s and try to at least talk to people and get the story out to as many as possible, even though it's only a select few. And at this particular juncture, I would say when I do 15, 20 minutes of Jesuit history, it's basically there for you to use it as a starting point and sometimes to go back. I mean, I remember the first time I talked about Jesuit history was, 25 years ago, and I still like to go back and do it because it's important. Now, they were founded originally as the Society of Jesus on August 15th, 1534, the day of the Assumption, during a secret ceremony held in the crypt of the Chapel of St. Denis by Ignatius of Loyola. Full name, Inigo Lopez de Loyola, Francisco Xavier, Alfonso Salmeron, Diego Yanez, and Nicolas Bobadilla from Spain, Peter Faber from Savoy, France, and a gentleman by the name of Simão Rodrigues from Portugal. Now, what occurred after that? Why were they there anyway? Why were they created? Basically as the military arm of the Vatican to stamp out the Protestant Reformation. Now, the Constitution of the Jesuits was first approved by Francis Borgia. And if you've lived in Italy, you know the strength and the power of the Borgia family, also known as the Duke of Grandia, nephew of Pope Alexander VI, and patron of Ignatius of Loyola. Borgia was the main financier back then and architect of the gradual transformation of the Jesuits in the first order of monks from the characteristics specifically military within the Catholic Church. He was also a promoter and adoption of the papal bull, Regimini Militantis, September 27, 1540, by the very close companion of the Borgia family, Alessandro Farnese, Pope Paul III, who first granted the official status of the Jesuit order. Ignatius of Loyola was noticed for the first time by the young Duke of Grandia already in 1529 when he was rearrested by the Inquisition in relation to extreme practices of religious devotion. Borgia saw the potential in the devotion of a military character founded on extremism, preached by Loyola, and his will to establish a military order of monks. It was the young Borgia who saved the life of Ignatius call him Ignatius Inquisition. Now, here's an interesting point. I like to notice a lot of little things and symbols today because nobody likes in the mainstream wants to talk about any of this history because it's too damning because the Jesuits haven't changed. But every time a president, and I can look at pictures of George Bush, they go and meet the Pope and they sit under a picture of Ignatius Loyola. I find that quite interesting. And we all know what Loyola is all about. Now, on the death of Ignatius in 1557, should have been Francis Borgia to secure the appointment of a second superior general in the Jesuit order. But however, his ambitions were thwarted in the first place by the archenemy, Pope Paul the Fourth, and he had always been one of the biggest opponents of Pope Alexander the Sixth. These popes, they never got along back then. It's quite interesting. They all came from royalty, and basically put there kind of as the new Pontifex Maximus of Rome. Now, we could go on with a little bit of this minutia, but I want to fast forward here and talk about some of the unique features of the Jesuits, which many people forget about or don't know about. And if they heard about it, don't take it seriously. So Borgia strengthened the already remarkable powers of the Superior General of the Jesuits, making the power of the order higher than that of any other in the history of the Church. That's why today, I remember when I was in Italy, we started talking, I had no idea. They said, they gave me the term Papa Nero, and I'd say, what the heck is that? And it was called the Black Pope. And so on the streets of Rome, I was given my first introduction of who the Superior General of the Jesuits was. Because my education with the Jesuits, my knowledge of them was simply this. They were priests that taught at Loyola High School in Chicago, near where I went to school at Notre Dame High School. They were always called great educators, and I remember that the talk in high school always was, boy, thank God we don't go to the Jesuit school. They're so disciplined, and we can get away with murder here in with the Holy Cross Fathers. They're much nicer and not as discipline-minded. That's what we used to talk about. That's all I knew about them when I went to Rome. So when I first heard of the power of the Black Pope, who turns out to be the Superior General of the Jesuits, I was, I didn't believe it. And I said, no way. And they said, oh yeah, he's got more power than the White Pope. And I said, well, who's that? And they said, well, that's the Pope. And I said, well, there's two? And they said, well, yeah, one is behind the scenes and one is out there in front telling all the lies. And that's coming from people on the street in Italy. So it, of course, as a journalist, piqued my interest and began to research. And what I found out was very troubling. And I didn't want it to be true because it took away everything I believed in as a kid. Right. Believe it or not, at one point in my life, I wanted to be a priest. And to hear all this, I'm going, my God, was I really lied to this much? And it's not easy, and a lot of times I just want to forget about it because when you take your core belief system and just turn it upside down, you kind of go, wow, what else are they lying to me about? And I guess it's consumed a major part of my life since. And sometimes I wish, I was a carpenter or something instead of a journalist. But anyway, he continued. Borgia further amended the Constitution, and Borgia also assured a papal bull, this is interesting, in 1545, which allowed the Jesuits to preach, hear confessions, dispense the sacraments, recite Mass, without having to refer to a bishop, therefore rank effectively outside the control of the regional clergy. And they were also given the power and the authority to hear the Pope's confessions. And we know that they've used the confessional as a way to blackmail many people throughout the years. Now, in addition, Borgia further amended the constitution of this military order of the Jesuits. Now, this doesn't sound like a bunch of, nice-going priests who want to educate and help the world, does it? And the biggest argument I get now is that if I read this, people go, why are you so worried about what happened in 1545? I said, because they haven't changed. And then I go, yes, they have. Ever since 1812, when they were again reinstated by the Vatican, they've just turned over a new leaf, and I say, no way. So whether you believe what I just told you or you believe what I say here, it's not important. What's important is to get the story on the table and to look at both sides and to have a reasonable, intelligent discussion about it. But you can't get that. You cannot get this story out. And when you try, what happens is the people that don't want the story out will marginalize you, will lie about you, and will say that you're crazy. That's what you're up against. But all it is really is looking at history and then bringing it up to date and say, look, tell me why this organization has changed. Where, and can we show? And then I would bring up a story of, let's talk about one of the Jesuit priests who works with ISIS in Syria, a Father Dall'Olio. Now, when you read his story, you'll see that they haven't changed. And when we say that the Vatican Jesuits created ISIS or also helped to fund it, bring money, act as a conduit of Western money to make sure ISIS has the weapons, that, where did they, all of a sudden they grew into this great organization. Where did they get the money? Well, when you start looking at some of the Jesuit priests that were involved with them, you start going, wow, they really haven't changed. But you're not going to get that story out either. So, in addition, so we're going back a little ways, but I think it's important. The Jesuits, when they managed to allow the transfer, now Borgia changed the Constitution, amount of power in favor of the office of the Superior General to be made according to the latter in terms of influence only to the Pope, in according to the Constitution beginning in 1565. And that remains in force even today. The Superior General can fulfill the priests and the new recruits from all their sins, even the sin of heresy, even the sin of murder, schism, and falsification of the apostolic writings. That can be wiped away by the Jesuit general. He can say, for the better good, this murder, this assassination is not murder, and you are forgiven, my son. What do you think they told the people that killed President Abraham Lincoln? The same thing. It was for the greater good. In addition, the Superior General, the time of Borgia, till Borgia and now, was given the power official, according to papal bull and standards contained therein, to annul sentences of excommunication, suspicion of a debarment, and also to fulfill priests, Jesuits, guilty of murder and bigamy. So he can basically forgive them. Okay, now let's think of something here. When I was in Italy, the story came out in 1982, and I've talked about it before. And this is one that blew my mind, to be honest with you. Because just you have to remember, back then I was learning about this stuff, and I mean, it was coming so fast I couldn't believe half of it. And I can understand why people can't believe it today when they hear it from me or others that talk this way. Because it's a huge, huge change in your belief system of what you've been told and taught your whole life. And I remember I was sitting there working on some stories, and it was right after there was a huge scandal in the Vatican Bank, and one of the cardinals of the head of the Vatican Bank, Paul Marcinkus from Chicago, was indicted for bank fraud. He eventually got off and was sent to America. But a huge story came out regarding, you see, the Vatican's stance on Freemasonry is that publicly they detest it. They oppose Freemasonry. So you would think that, when you talk about Catholicism and Freemasonry, that they do not adhere to Freemasonry. But when a story appeared in the Italian and French newspapers that outed hundreds of high-level cardinals, bishops, what have you, as being involved in Freemasonry, to the point even Marcinkus was outed, to the point that you sit there and you roll your eyes. Well, if they publicly say they're opposed to Freemasonry, and in canon law, anyone involved in Freemasonry is excommunicated, no longer holds his position in the church, you would think that 100 or so bishops wouldn't be involved in it, but they were so involved that they were even given their code names out in public. They talked about how they were meeting secretly with the P2 Lodge, one of the major Freemasonic lodges in Italy during the time of this huge scandal that was involved in a lot of crimes. So when that came out, I went, wow, well, how do they operate? Now, I remember the story continued. Now, if canon law says they're excommunicated, I figured, well, all these bishops are going to be excommunicated. Do you know not one ever was? And so what I think happened here was they were all given immunity by the Jesuit general here, who has that power, okay? Or by the Pope. So they say, yes, you're involved in Freemasonry, but we'll let you go. Now, the point is, on the surface, they say they're not involved. They hate Freemasonry. But behind the scenes, they created it. In a sense, control it. And that is a great story. But one of the most striking successes of Borgia, going back to the 1500s, took place in the year of his death, when assured his order under the pontificate of Pope Gregory XIII, I believe, in 1572, the right of the Jesuits to conduct business in the commercial and banking industry. So here's the deal here. People tell me today, you're crazy, these guys are just priests. Well, they were given, back in the 1500s, the right to conduct business, get involved in commerce and banking, and that right had not been granted to any religious order of the Catholic Church since the time of the Knights Templars, 400 years before. And so that's where you get the analogy the Jesuits are similar to the Knights Templars. So, in fact, these are precisely the rules contained in the Constitution of the Jesuit order, which led to the nickname that I said earlier, given to the Superior General, Papa Nero. And I remember the first time I heard that, saying, impossible. No way. But boy, I have had to change my mind on that one. And what stories it has led to, let me tell you. Now, you can see that when you make a statement like, well, in this particular case, the prosecutor who was putting this gentleman in jail because of his anti-papal thought, preaching about the banking system, happened to be a Jesuit priest who wasn't wearing the collar. Then you find out they're also bankers, they're also astronomers, they were given this authority hundreds of years ago, the only ones in the Catholic Church that can go out, take off their collar, and just creep in to the society for the better good of what? Their Constitution and their vows state they'll do anything for the papacy and its control, no matter how criminal it may be. And then they can, of course, be exonerated. Well, I've got a few minutes left. Why don't we spend a few minutes talking about Jesuits and education? And that's really what, most people that don't know about them will hear about, yes, they're the great educators. And if you check in history, yes, they have been educating the elite in Europe for hundreds of years. What do you think they do here at Georgetown University, right next to the White House? The School of Foreign Service, created by Father Edmund Walsh, who's deceased now, who was basically nothing more than a CIA spy, created the School of Foreign Service, and now to this day, most of our diplomats and high-level people are educated there, Jesuit educated. And if you start looking at the way they're created in this country with different provinces all over the country, you'll see that, boy, this order has grown to be a powerful organization. Now, on the surface, they're called the Great Educators. And although since its origin, the military order of Jesuits has been designed to demonstrate its capability to conduct risky and dangerous missions of all kinds, assassinations, propaganda, falsification of documents, and theft. Their primary mission outside of that was and still remains commitment oriented to defeat all forces that were opposed the authority of the Roman Catholic Pope, in particular the Protestant movement. And even during the 16th century, the Catholic Church undertook to obstruct and check out the free trade and access to education through the combination of pontifical right, political action, and also occasionally using force. And on the contrary, those states that had rejected the supremacy of the Pope, like England and many parts of Germany, France, Eastern and Northern Europe, were free to pursue unhindered free trade and independent choice in the field of education. Among the most important consequences of the Reformation, according, I'm paraphrasing here from a website called CWPA, okay? Some good information on Jesuits and education. The most dangerous consequences of the Reformation, the most dangerous for the Catholic Church proved and still proves access to education. And for this reason, the Jesuits, in such an early stage, they were forced to adopt a counterposition in education. Using the powers granted to them, quietly formed the Jesuits in education sector, a counter-movement in opposition to the Protestants, using the priceless advantage in regard to access to the secret archives of the Vatican. They devoted themselves, the Jesuits, to manipulate every major source of science and philosophy, acting against the Protestant intellectuals, including the subversion of their secret societies. And as we look at Jesuit education, didn't I say they had that advantage of the Vatican archives? Well, just go to Rome and try to get in there. And I always said, boy, I would like to spend a vacation there reading all those manuals that they have. I mean, thousands and thousands, acres of books hidden from the public. Only to their eyes can they read that importance of history, giving them a great advantage. And it's protected more than Fort Knox. Let me tell you that. Okay, we're almost out of time. I only have 30 seconds. I do want to tell you, go to my website at greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com, and you can get shows going back well over a decade regarding what I call the Vatican-led New World Order. And like I said, let me just tell you this. I'm not here to change the world. Don't think you can. Only looking at the stories that really impact you and the stories that have been left out of that equation. And only by putting everything as much as we can. That's what this country's all about, right? Freedom of speech. That's a great story, how that Constitution was formed and why. Well, anyway, I'll get to that someday, somehow. Come back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal. Have a good night. See you tomorrow on FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.